Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video I'm going to be taking you through all my thoughts for the new Blight League Atlas and the big shakeup that just happened. So in terms of this video, at the end you should have a pretty good idea of at least what I'm going to be doing and a few ideas hopefully of your own. We will be going through a spreadsheet and a few other things. So to kick off, I do want to just quickly touch on the Blight League and kind of how I feel like it's going to influence the mapping meta for this patch. So I've got a few notes here and we'll quickly blaze through these as quickly as we can. So in terms of rewards, I do feel like Blight is going to be at least equal to, if not greater than, Legion rewards on a map by map basis. And the reason I say this is because we have a similar reward structure, but we are actually seeing a higher quantity from the promotional material, at least, of kind of rewards which will come out of these encounters. So in Legion, you'd probably get around 4 to 5, maybe 6 specific reward chests per kind of encounter, whether those are reward monsters or the reward chests. Now in Blight League, I've seen like 7 or 8 just in a normal map, and sometimes it sounds like they can go even higher. In addition to this, we also have a loot explosion that comes out of the center of the spore after you finish the encounter, which we can see also in the promotional material. So what does this mean? Basically, this means that we have the chests and a higher quantity of them at that, it seems, and we also have a magic findable kind of component to the league in the form of killing the monsters and having a loot explosion from them, incursion or delve style, at the end. So the rewards are going to be crazy, and the GGG devs also mentioned in Bay Class that monsters will come continually at the speed that you're killing them. So you can kind of speed clear these to some extent, it seems. So on that note, blights per hour will probably be a thing, and that will be influencing kind of some of the decisions that I've made when ranking kind of the maps that we've seen on the new Atlas. So in terms of the blight mechanic, it does seem that you will be able to trivialize the tower building kind of part of the league with enough gear or with like something like a headhunter. So that is going to probably slap a massive premium on the belt. In addition to that, they have also mentioned in the patch notes that they have been nerfing specific ways to get league items from other leagues. So stuff like from like incursion, for example, the storage room, the bench, from stuff like any of the kind of league specific things like the chest and delve. Those will all drop less league specific items from now on, apparently, according to the patch notes, and what that means is less headhunters. However, there is also something to counteract this, and that is Harbinger. So we have Harbinger on the map device, and we also have Nemesis on the map device, and what this will allow people to do is actually grab any unique leather belt, zone into a Nemesis map with a big stack of ancient orbs or chance orbs, and try and create a headhunter out of using that currency. So we've got something that's nerfing headhunter, and we've also got something that's buffing headhunter. So definitely interesting, and I do think that the belt will be in very high demand, not only for clearing normal maps, but also for clearing blighted maps, which I think are going to be absolutely broken. I think they're going to be crazy, but that will all remain to be seen. So next up, we don't know exactly how the scaling will work for blights just yet as of this video. So we don't know whether white maps will have significantly worse rewards and red will have significantly better rewards. But if Legion's anything to go by, even with the significant increase in rewards in red maps, it didn't even hold a candle to the efficiency that you could gain from doing white maps. So I think it will probably be a similar case, that white maps are better, unless they just seriously really buff up those red maps. So yeah, as I mentioned, the blighted maps will probably be completely insane, but we can't make any predictions on those because none of us have played them. So enough with the chat, let's get straight into that new Atlas and start talking a bit of strategy. So let's get into it. To begin with, I just want to quickly go over the new Atlas and how I sorted a few things out. So to begin with, the first thing we needed to understand is which maps will have which color sextants. This is actually extremely important, and I will get into it a little bit later in the video why that's relevant. But basically, I went through every single map and I determined how many of each colored sextant would be on each map that is relevant. So that's quite interesting information that we have now. And in general, as always, we don't want the red sextants, but yellows and whites are very desirable. So yeah, anything with red sextants and most of the red maps I will not really be considering in this video, except a few specific ones such as layer and tower. Now, one thing I did realize when I was analyzing the atlas is compared to previous leagues, there was something a little bit off. So in previous updates, they've mentioned that each map is to have at least minimum 5 sextant locations possible on them. Now this doesn't seem to be exactly the case with a lot of these maps. As you can see, Jungle Valley is just barely either in or out of range of a lot of these sextant locations. There's some real bad offenders with this as well. I think Pit would probably be a pretty good example of this. Maybe? Oh no, not that one. Anyway, there's a few that I noticed which don't, like, they have like 1 or 2 in radius of this circle here. And just to give a bit of background on this circle, this is the circle which basically accurately represents a sextant location in all past leagues. So this is the Delve Atlas, and you can quite clearly see that it includes all of them here. So I'm not sure if it's just a bit of a funny kind of shape of the atlas this league, with the maps like kind of being this awkward kind of squash circle, but it definitely was something I noticed and something that I thought I'd bring up. So I did have to eyeball a few of these because I'm assuming the radius is just a little bit bigger than it is normally, and there's been a few modifications to how big the sextants are or how big the maps are on the atlas. So a bit interesting there, but yeah, that's with that out of the way, let's get straight into the spreadsheet. So what were we looking for in terms of the spreadsheet here? We were looking for maps which had either one connector to them so that they would be very good early farming candidates, or we were also looking for maps which had a lot of white or yellow sextants on them. Those are kind of like the criteria that we were trying to match, and we were also considering the map itself, of course. We were looking at div cards, we were looking at density, we were looking at speed of clearing the map, and we were also looking at that all-important map boss, because in the new patch, the map boss will actually be very important, and you will probably want to be killing that map boss as much as you can. And the reason for this is every time you kill a map boss, you have a chance to add a master mission to your kind of daily bounty or accumulation of master missions on the right hand side of the atlas, which is a new feature that's being added into the league. So what this basically means is that you'll get more temples, more delves, more everything, the more bosses you kill per hour. So this is actually extremely relevant, and we will be looking at the map boss quite specifically in the spreadsheet. So to begin with, for tier 1, you have a couple options here. We have Arcade and Jungle Valley. So both of these have 5 white sextants from what I can see, and they also will need to be shaped from T1 up to T6, but at that point you can sustain them infinitely by removing all other T6s and 7s from your atlas and just having that shaped. So you should be able to get to this very early on. This is a very viable strategy without really the need to dip into any of the red maps or even get that Elder Orb. So you can kind of kickstart your farming adventure very early and start powering through all of that content. So some very early and potentially good strategies here around these two maps. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get to farming earlier than everyone else. It really does put you way ahead. You get more of those uniques and they're worth a lot more. You can do Chaos Recipe and buy Exalts cheap. It's just really crazy. So very appealing here, and that'll be very cool indeed. Next up, you have Alleyways and Mesa. So when taking into account that speed clear kind of blights per hour, and you also want to take into account the boss, both of these bosses are very easy and they're both very quick maps. So you can see they both have 2 connectors, so they're not going to be viable at their base tier of tier 2 until you get the Elder Orb. However, you can, again, like Arcade and Jungle Valley, shape them up and go with it that way. But shaping them up will take them into tier 7, which is kind of getting a bit kind of yikes in terms of sustain early on. So you want to try and keep it to lower tier maps if you can, possibly early on. So definitely options there, especially after you get the Elder Orb, and I'll be trying some of these out for sure. So next up, we have a few other maps here which are very good. We have Ashenwood, which I consider one of the best maps, and I actually will go over the colors here because I'm sure that is a little bit confusing for some of you new viewers. Basically, the colors mean purple, I consider this a meta map, which will probably be meta defining and will be run like a lot during the league and will be very powerful. Green means it's a fantastic layout. Good means it's decent, and red means it's probably not too great. Now, all of these rankings are based on my personal opinion and the builds that I play. I play a lot of bow builds and a lot of kind of Nova based builds. So they excel at open layouts and maybe not enclosed layouts. So that's a bit of information, and the criteria we obviously looked at were the boss, density, divination cards, and the clear speed. So yeah, back to tier 3. So we have Ashenwood here. It's a very small map, so it will be ideal for clearing blights per hour. The boss is very easy, and it is very, very, very good density in my opinion for the size that it is. In terms of like density per size, it's very, very, very competitive. And again, we have 6 white sections here, which is actually relevant. The more sections you have, the more flexibility you have to kind of shape it to how you want it to be. More experienced players will probably understand what I mean by that. But let's continue. So Strand is another very good contender with only 1 connector, meaning you can go infinite on it at tier 3 with just a Shaper's Orb, which is extremely relevant for the early game and farming those blights early. So really, really interesting. Strand will definitely be a competitor, especially with 7 potential white sextants. Next up we have Mausoleum. This one is a bit of an interesting one. It has 3 connections, which I don't think I've ever seen before on the Atlas. But it is a very good layout, and you will want to be shaping this one up to tier 8 if you do consider doing it. The downside of this one is that it does have a very bad boss, so you will be kind of cutting yourself out from master missions in this scenario. So maybe not the best, but it's definitely decent. Next up we have Tropical Island. Tropical Island is one of the most linear maps with very, very good density and a ridiculously easy boss as well. So definitely worth a note, but definitely going to be a later game kind of option here with 2 connectors. So next up we have 2 very heavy hitters. We have Arid Lake and Burial Chambers. So Burial Chambers, as we mentioned earlier, Headhunter is going to be in high demand in my opinion, and obviously due to that we're going to have a lot of people trying to or will be farming Burial Chambers. So Burial Chambers is tier 4 this league, and it has 2 connections, meaning you will need the Elder Orb to sustain it at tier 4, which is, it's probably a bit good and a bit bad, because it'll kind of incentivize people to push that Atlas a little bit more, but it does mean that you can't farm those Headhunters really extra early and try and go for a bit of gamble on your luck there. Next up we have Arid Lake. Arid Lake only has 1 connection, which makes it a very, very good early game choice. It's a beautiful map in terms of layout, and it also has a very easy boss, especially for a low geared character. Because the boss has no ranged attacks and no real abilities, you can kind of kite it around endlessly and eventually just kill it even if you have very low damage. So it's definitely a candidate for one that I'll be starting out on. Compared to something like Strand, Strand is definitely a much harder boss to kill than Arid Lake. So Arid Lake's probably a little bit safer, and I think it has a lot more monsters and potentially even a bit of a nicer layout than Strand in my opinion. Next up we have the almighty Channel. Channel drops Humility, which can be handed in for Tabula Rasa, so it's going to be a hot pick early on. Unfortunately, it does have 2 connections, meaning it's going to be a bit of a later game kind of sustain unless you want to shape it. But shaping it is definitely going to be a bit of a concern at the tier 4, which will take it up to T9 point. So definitely probably going to be looking at doing that after you get your Elder Orb or buying maps in. So definitely interesting. It also drops the Scavenger, which can be turned in for Carcass Jack for those AoE builds. So at this point, now that we're getting up kind of in the higher tiers, I'm just going to go over the purple maps because I think those are really the ones that we want to focus on. Because once you start getting into the later game, you're going to want to start trying to get those Shaper's Orb and Elder Orb anyway, and you probably won't be looking at farming too many more of these maps except for maybe Racecourse. But they're here if you want to take a look at them, and I'm just going to focus on the maps I think are really good from now on. So we have Beach and City Square. So Beach is of course a very insane map. It's got a great layout. The boss is a little bit difficult early on without gear, but again it's got 2 connectors, so this will be a bit of a kind of more end game strategy unless you want to shape it up and use sextants on it. It also does have 3 and only 2 yellows, so it's got 5, but it's kind of a split, meaning it's a bit interesting there as well if yellow sextants turn out to be expensive. City Square in a similar position, however this is kind of offset by the fact that it has 3 bosses. 3 bosses generally does mean a little bit better map sustain, at least in my experience, and you could see yourself sustaining this even though it has 2 connectors, and I will go into that at the end of the video because I did do a bit of that in Legion. And then moving on, we have Racecourse here. It's worth an honorable mention because it has 1 connection only, and it does have the 3 bosses. And if you guys are curious, 3 bosses means that you can get 3 times the chance at sacrificial fragments, which are worth about a chaos each at the start of the league if you vol the map. So it can be a very, very good source of income early because a lot of people are trying to run at Zeri, which uses those sacrificial fragments to kind of like get money from boss killing. So very, very interesting there, and Racecourse could be good, just like City Square has a decent boss to kill, and it's got a very, very good layout. So maybe look into Racecourse as well. Next up, we have Underground Sea. It wouldn't be a list if Underground Sea wasn't on it. It does have 2 connections though, so we will be seeing that a little bit later on probably. And it will actually probably end up as a red map if you shape it, so it's probably going to be an Elder Orb kind of situation to be getting this on a lower tier kind of farm. Of course, it also does have a ton of yellow sextants, but we'll get into yellow sextants in just a few minutes. Next up we have Atoll, and this one I actually specifically want to talk about because generally it's not considered a top tier map due to the fact it has low density, and that's pretty much the only issue it has. But we're going to go into it now. For starters, it has only 1 connection, meaning you can probably go infinite on it at tier 8 if you use maybe 1 or 2 sextants, or if you kind of get lucky with blights. We'll have to see how many maps they drop, but we will quickly boot up PoE, and I do want to show you guys something pretty interesting with the Atoll map. So we'll get into that right now, and we'll jump into the game. So the thing I wanted to show you guys is something similar to Glacier. So if you guys didn't know, the developers mentioned that they are nerfing Glacier and increasing the amount of league specific spawn points in the map. So that means that it won't always spawn at the start of the map anymore, and it will generally spawn like anywhere in the map. So it could spawn in the cave, it could spawn in the start, it could spawn really anywhere. Now Atoll is in a bit of an interesting situation because the map itself is kind of essentially, it's like a figure 8, and I can show you what it looks like by running in here. Now, I want you guys to quickly take note of this section here, and I'll also point out the next section I want you guys to take note of, which will be in a second. So, as I mentioned, it's a figure 8, and obviously the figure 8 has kind of a few intercepting points, mainly in the middle. Now, Atoll isn't a perfect figure 8. As you can see here, it's got kind of this connection here, which makes it kind of like a boxy kind of 8. Now, in my experience, I've run a lot of Atoll. League mechanics always spawn either here at one of the intersections of the 8 or here. Meaning when you zone into the map here, you can just essentially, potentially, run straight up here and check this spot or this spot for the Blight, and it'll probably, most of the time, be in both. As you can see, the lab trial spawned right here, and this is definitely not out of the normal. We tried it on stream a few maps, and all the Soulfight nodes, for example, spawned up along here, and we've also had all the betrayals spawn up along here as well. So unless they also changed Atoll, Atoll could be potentially the new Glacier. In addition to that, it's also a very quick map to run in its entirety, so even if they didn't change it, you can probably get through the whole map, find the Blight very, very fast, and even finish the map very, very quickly if you wanted to as well. You can see it's very, very linear. There's absolutely nothing for your character to get stuck on, and the boss is also ridiculously easy when you come in here. He's a one-shot easy, no phases, and he doesn't really do anything. So I think Atoll could really be a serious contender for blights per hour, and I don't think that I've seen anything that really comes close yet to being like, in terms of like speed of blights per hour as Atoll. So definitely very, very interesting there, and I will 100% be checking this out as soon as I can in the league, and I'll try and update you on that. So the last one here I have in terms of the farming is Dunes. So Dunes is probably one of the best maps out of all maps in terms of open layouts. It's a very, very good layout, and it does only have 1 connection here, which means you can get to it. However, because of the fact it's T10, you actually will still need the Elder Orb because you cannot shape a red map, which is the connector for Dunes. So that's a bit of a shame. You will need the Elder Orb anyway, but Dunes is of course a very, very good map indeed. A bit of a downside is though that it only has 4 yellow sections from what I can see, meaning that you won't have 2 reds there if you decide to go crazy with them. Next up, some honorable mentions in the tier 11 slot. We do have Tower and Lair, but if you're running either Tower or Lair, which are fantastic maps for their divination cards, you will need the Elder Orb and you will need to use it on them. In this league, you cannot go infinite like you could in last league on these 2 maps due to the fact their locations on the Atlas. They both have 2 connections, and as I mentioned, you cannot shape red maps. So you would be forced to use one Elder Orb, and then the other one would be left open, so you can't do it. So you have to Elder Orb, Lair, or Tower themselves. So those are all the maps which I think are worth looking at, guys, and I'm going to quickly sum up a few things for you guys in terms of the Atlas strategy, narrow it down a little bit to what I think might be extremely powerful and what I will be trying myself. So let's get straight into it. The maps obviously that we talked about here are all here for like kind of easy reference, but the ones that I will be specifically looking at are Ashenwood, City Square, Racecourse, and Atoll. So Ashenwood and City Square are my likely candidates to look at early, and of course probably around day 2 I'll probably be looking into Atoll and seeing how powerful that is for farming currency and blights per hour. We also have Racecourse here. If City Square doesn't work out for me, I will be going with Racecourse to try that out. And I'll speak quickly about my plans for each map. So in terms of Ashenwood and City Square, I have confirmed that it is possible, at least on City Square, to sustain it without actually blocking out the above tier. And what this allows you to do is actually manipulate the Atlas in a pretty interesting way. So what I was doing lastly is I would have my City Squares as my only tier 4. In this case it would be tier 5, and then I would also make it so that I can manipulate the tiers below it and above it to force a specific map that I wanted to sell to drop. So in this case I would probably pick on Racecourse and Burial Chambers. So I'd want my only tier 4 to be Burial Chambers and my only tier 6 to be Racecourse. Or you can even do it as Lighthouse or Bone Crypt, it doesn't really matter, depending on which one you want to sell. So basically the upshot here is you may actually be able to sustain City Square without blocking out tier 6s, and I will be testing that in the league. It will depend on how many maps Blight drops and if they've changed anything about triple boss maps, because that's part of the reason you could sustain it. Triple bosses seem to drop a lot more maps in the game currently. So next up we obviously have Ashenwood up here. Something might be similar depending on how many maps Blight drops. You may not need to kind of shape the above tier and block out much there. We'll have to test that. Obviously being a fairly low tier map, it might be viable just because it's a low tier map. So next up we obviously had a bit of a chat about Atoll, and we also have Racecourse, which has one connector, so I'll be doing that the traditional way, and I'll be trying to farm that if everything else goes pear-shaped. So a couple few things I want to end on here, and that is the Zana map device and yellow sextants and potential synergies between both of them. So in the new league we have obviously both Nemesis and Harbinger in the map device there. So what that basically means is that Ancient Orbs are going to be worth a significant amount more because of Headhunter being chanceable through Nemesis, which means that Harbinger, which was already a very profitable part of the game, is going to be even more profitable. So it may very well be the case that Harbinger is just worth running on every map you do, and that could be pretty insane. Now, there's something very interesting that happens with yellow sextants, and that is the Harbingers drop additional currency items or currency fragments from maps. It's a sextant modifier, and it was so worth it last league that it almost outstripped the additional cost of yellow sextants due to the fact that the shards were just so valuable. You'd get Exalt shards, Annulment shards, Ancient shards, but the Ancient shards weren't worth too much, but they will definitely be worth something this league, and that kind of subsidized yellow sextants quite a lot. So yellow sextants are going to be worth even more to use this league, because not only are you going to have the Scarab to put on there, not only are you going to get Harbinger shards from the boss, but you'll also now be able to roll Harbinger on the map with the Harbinger Zana mod, meaning you'll add an additional 2 Harbingers for the cost of only 4 chaos, which is going to be easily repaid by any of the shards that drop. Now what's even more interesting about this is that you can take it even further with 3 map boss maps. So basically on maps like Racecourse and Atoll, you get an additional amount of shards from those bosses, because obviously each individual boss drops those shards. So that sextant modifier could be completely insane with the new league, and I think it's actually going to push yellow sextants to the point where they might just be better than white sextants just because of that one modifier. In addition to this, Legion is also being added to the base game and will be a sextant modifier as well. And we all know how good Legion is for currency. So it's possible that that's also a yellow sextant modifier, making yellow sextants even more desirable, meaning that we actually may want to favor yellow maps over white maps for once in our lives. So definitely very, very interesting there. So that's kind of my initial plan for the Blight League. I'm going to be chasing those Blights per hour, and I'm going to be experimenting with all kinds of things, but these are my initial ideas. Tell me what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next league, which is coming up real soon. I'll be streaming on Twitch, so you guys can check me out live and see how I start the league. Hopefully nothing goes wrong, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.